Did you know that Max Verstappen was back close to pole position thanks to a secret upgrade to his Red Bull? A McLaren-inspired redesign could change everything for the three-time champion. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, do you think Red Bull can dominate again this season? What did they discover at Imola that could change the title battle? In this video, I'll tell you how Red Bull's latest updates directly affected Verstappen's performance at Imola and what they mean for the rest of the championship. Over the last few Grands Prix, Red Bull has been under increasing pressure. What was once unquestionable dominance began to show cracks in the face of McLaren's unstoppable advance. The Woking team hasn't just closed the gap, it has overtaken Red Bull at key tracks, both in qualifying pace and on long runs. For Max Verstappen, this meant one thing very clear: the RB21 was no longer the dominant car he used to have in his hands. Until a few races ago, the Dutchman had to squeeze every millisecond out of the car just to stay close to Oscar Piastri or Lando Norris. Despite his talent, race weekends began to show signs of frustration, especially when the car's balance didn't allow him to attack as he's used to. Verstappen is a driver who bases much of his performance on precision. When the car doesn't respond faithfully to his commands, the difference is noticeable lap after lap. On the other hand, the comments within the paddock were increasingly consistent. Red Bull needed to act, and quickly. What at the start of the championship seemed like a sufficient advantage to control the pace of development became an imminent threat. McLaren not only matched Red Bull, it learned from its strengths and began to innovate in areas where the Austrians were stagnating. This left the team with only one possible option: to evolve its concept. And that's where the Imola Grand Prix became a turning point. It was the perfect opportunity to show that they could react with force, precision, and speed. The Italian track, known for its technical demands, represented the ideal laboratory to test a revamped aerodynamic package that could give Verstappen back control. What was at stake wasn't simply a good qualifying performance or scoring a few more points. Red Bull needed to send a message, not just to the other teams, but to themselves, to show that they could adapt, innovate, and give Max a car capable of fighting for pole. And in that process, Imola became much more than just another race on the calendar. It was the stage where, arguably, the recapture of the championship began. The package of improvements Red Bull brought to Imola wasn't a simple update. It was a profound, surgical intervention on the RB21's critical points. The team not only sought to correct its weaknesses but also to reinterpret its own aerodynamic concept based on what they had already learned from their rivals, especially McLaren. The most visible change began with the side pods, a key area of the car for airflow management. Here, Red Bull adopted a solution clearly inspired by the design McLaren successfully introduced in 2024. This redesign of the side air intakes wasn't just for aesthetic purposes. It was a functional restructuring, incorporating a mid-wing, capable of redirecting the airflow toward the rear of the car with greater precision. This piece, located in the upper area of the side pods, aims to increase ground effect efficiency and generate more downforce, especially useful in high-speed corners like Tamburello or the Variante Alta. These corners, present at Imola, demand millimetric stability at extreme speeds, and that's where this change made a difference. In addition to the lateral redesign, vertical deflectors were added just below the air intakes. These elements, although discrete, serve a strategic purpose. They channel air more aggressively toward the rear diffuser, maximizing the car's stability during mid-acceleration phases. This is a technique that Ferrari has been developing for over a year, and Red Bull didn't hesitate to adopt it. The interesting thing is that it's not just about copying ideas, but integrating them into a unique philosophy, and that requires precision and know-how. One of the components that had already debuted in Miami, but was only now used by both Red Bull drivers, was the new flat floor. This part, invisible to the casual observer, is actually one of the pillars of modern Formula One performance. The new floor has the ability to generate more aerodynamic lift under the car, which translates into greater grip without the need to add more downforce to the rear wing. It's a clever way to increase performance without sacrificing efficiency on the straights, although, as we'll see later, that efficiency still has room for improvement. In parallel, work was done on the rear suspension. Red Bull slightly shortened the upper wishbones, which changed the camber of the wheels. This adjustment may seem minimal, but it has a direct impact on traction when exiting slow corners. More camber means the tire has a larger contact patch in steeper conditions, which is essential on stages like Rivazza and McLaren. These modifications also helped reduce wear on the rear left tire, one of the car's most repeated weaknesses during the first races of the year. No less important was the redesign of the rear brake duct inlets. Here, the goal was clear: improve system cooling without compromising aerodynamic efficiency. It's a delicate balance. If you cool too much, you lose energy. If you cool too little, you risk overheating the brakes and nearby tires. Red Bull found a compromise that, at least at Imola, allowed stable temperatures to be maintained without sacrificing overall performance. Taken together, these improvements represent an aggressive bid to regain control of the championship. Red Bull didn't limit itself to minor tweaks. It reworked key parts of its car to give Verstappen a competitive edge. But any technical improvement is only valuable if it translates into on-track performance. Technical changes on paper are one thing, but how the car behaves on the road is quite another. For Verstappen, the goal at Imola wasn't simply to feel comfortable, but to regain the confidence to push to the limit without losing control at key moments. Qualifying, that moment when every detail counts and there's no room for error, was the ultimate test to measure whether the RB21's improvements were truly effective. And the results soon spoke for themselves. From the first attempts in Q1, the difference was evident. Verstappen managed to extract more performance from the car, particularly in the first sector, where the RB21 showed a clear improvement in stability and traction. According to telemetry data analyzed by the team, the three-time world champion recovered up to 0.15 seconds compared to his previous times in free practice. This progress was not the result of chance, but rather a precise combination of increased downforce at the front and a more predictable overall balance of the car during quick changes of direction. A key point of this improvement was the Tamburello corner. Here, the RB21 used to exhibit a slight tendency toward oversteer, forcing Max to constantly correct during fast laps. But with the new aerodynamic design, this characteristic was almost eliminated. The car became more compliant on entry and more solid on exit. Furthermore, rear left tire wear, which was previously noticeably high at this corner, was reduced by 7%. This statistic is crucial because it reveals not only that the car was faster but also that it was using its resources better, especially on a circuit as demanding as Imola. Verstappen also made this clear in his subsequent comments. He spoke of a car that responded more faithfully to its settings, something crucial in qualifying sessions where every adjustment can mean the difference between pole position and a third row. What stood out most was the way the RB21 handled transition areas like McLaren, where steering corrections must be subtle yet firm. There, Max achieved cleaner and faster maneuvers, allowing him to gain time in a sector where McLaren had historically been superior. However, not everything was perfect. The RB21's performance began to fade toward the end of the Q3 hot laps. And the cause was clear: the tires. Red Bull decided to opt for the softest compound, Pirelli's new C6, an extremely fast but also very temperature-sensitive rubber. Although the decision was intended to make a splash on the first lap, thermal degradation set in sooner than expected. Verstappen lost up to 0.12 seconds in the final third of his final lap due to obvious overheating of the rear tires. It wasn't a minor loss, it was the difference between pole and second place. Interestingly, while other teams like Mercedes opted for the medium compounds, Red Bull relied on its internal simulation, which indicated that the softs would offer superior performance, at least during the first attempt. Team principal Christian Horner defended this choice, arguing that the data indicated a clear advantage on the first lap. But he also admitted that his thermal models might not have accurately reflected actual performance under Imola's conditions. In other words, the theory worked, but the track had other plans. Despite this setback in the closing stages of the session, the overall balance was positive. Verstappen finished just 0.034 seconds off pole, a minimal margin considering that just 2 races ago the gap to McLaren was over 0.3. This narrowing of the timesheets demonstrates that Red Bull has not only made up ground, but has also found a foundation upon which to build a more competitive car for the upcoming races. But it also made it clear that the margin for error is increasingly narrow, and that any failure in strategy or thermal management can have a very high cost. One of the most decisive elements of the weekend at Imola was undoubtedly tire management. And what seemed like an advantage quickly became one of Red Bull's most visible limitations. Pirelli introduced a new compound, the C6, the softest in its range, with the intention of encouraging aggressive strategies and more explosive qualifying sessions. At first glance, it seemed like the ideal tire to maximize the RB21's performance on a fast lap. But behind that extra grip lay a hidden cost, which Max Verstappen ended up paying at the most crucial moment. Red Bull opted for the soft compound in Q3, a decision that, from the outside, made sense. The team's internal simulations showed that if they managed to warm up the tire optimally without overdoing it, the C6 offered a significant gain on the first flying lap. That was the idea. Risk everything at the first opportunity, nail the lap, and leave the rest to the clock. However, the theory didn't match the practice. On track, conditions were more challenging than expected, with hotter-than-expected asphalt in sections where aerodynamic downforce caused the rear axle to overheat prematurely. The result was a loss of performance precisely where Verstappen needed stability the most, in the final sector of the lap. The C6 compound, which initially offered outstanding grip, began to lose effectiveness after the first two sectors. Telemetry data shows a drop of up to 0.12 seconds compared to the projected best time, directly linked to the increase in temperature in the rear tires. Most worrying is that this drop was not gradual, but abrupt. Max entered the final section with a car that no longer behaved as it had in the first two sectors, forcing him to make small corrections that, cumulatively, cost him valuable tenths of a second. The paradox became evident. The fastest tire was, at the same time, the most fragile. And on a track like Imola, where the margin for error is minimal and fast corners demand constant traction, that fragility translates into lost time. Mercedes, in contrast, chose the medium compound. Their approach was more conservative, but it offered a more stable performance window, with less thermal degradation. Red Bull, for its part, went all in, and although the gap was minimal, it was enough to prevent Verstappen from taking pole. Christian Horner acknowledged this at the end of the session. He said the simulation data showed a clear advantage with the C6S, but also admitted that our thermal models need to be reviewed. That seemingly minor phrase hides a deeper problem. Red Bull has one of the best simulation tools in the paddock, but if its models don't accurately reflect the tire's actual behavior, the entire strategy is undermined. And when competing against teams with such aggressive margins for improvement as McLaren, any miscalculation can turn into a huge, wasted opportunity. This dilemma opens a broader conversation about the RB21's design. With the new upgrades, the car generates more downforce, especially on the rear axle. That helps cornering stability, yes, but it also means the tires must endure more thermal pressure, especially on short runs where there's no time for the tires to cool. It's a double-edged sword. More downforce means more immediate grip, but also more thermal stress, and if not managed with surgical precision, it transforms into overheating. For Verstappen, this represents an additional challenge. Because even with a better balanced car and a technically flawless lap, if the tire loses efficiency before crossing the line, there's no way to compensate. This leaves Red Bull with an urgent task: develop more effective cooling solutions, improve its thermal simulations, and reconsider its strategic approach when the margins are so tight. After the strategic move at Imola, Red Bull has shown that it still has the capacity to respond, but the big question is whether this momentum can be sustained throughout the European season. Because although the update package worked and allowed Verstappen to get dangerously close to pole, the gap to McLaren remains. It's smaller, yes, but it's still there. And that forces the team to go beyond a one-off improvement. They need continuous, constant, and effective evolution if they want to regain control of the championship. From within the team, the next steps are already being anticipated. Red Bull is preparing a new package of improvements that will debut at the Spanish Grand Prix, a track with highly aerodynamic demands, where it will be more evident whether the solutions implemented at Imola have a positive impact or were just temporary relief. According to internal sources, these new modifications will include a redesigned front wing with passive movable elements, capable of improving airflow under the car and, at the same time, reducing drag on straight lines without sacrificing stability in fast corners. Another crucial point will be the cooling system. As was clear at Imola, one of the RB21's Achilles heels lies in the thermal management of the rear tires. The team is already working on a redesign of the vents to reduce the temperature in that area by 10 to 15%. This change may seem small, but in Formula One, those numbers can make the difference between maintaining performance or losing it before finishing a lap. If they manage to control this aspect, Max could have a more consistent car in qualifying and more robust in the race. There will also be adjustments to the rear suspension, seeking greater vertical travel to improve energy absorption in fast corners. This solution will not only help mitigate degradation of the inside tire, but will also increase the car's overall stability in sections with elevation changes, which is essential at tracks like Silverstone or Suzuka. With this, Red Bull is not only focusing on Spain, but also on building a versatile platform for the entire European leg of the championship. The interesting thing is that these improvements will arrive at a key moment in the calendar. With 80% of the upcoming races taking place in Europe, development logistics become much more efficient. The team can react more quickly, bring in new parts with less lead time, and implement changes almost in real time, which could be a decisive advantage over McLaren, which is also evolving but with a different structure. However, beyond the technical improvements, there is a strategic reading that Red Bull cannot ignore. Their performance at Imola showed they have the ability to get close to the top, but also made it clear that there is no room for error. The wrong tire choice, a thermal prediction error, or a reliability issue can cost them vital points. In this scenario, every detail counts. And Max Verstappen needs more than just speed. He needs a predictable, stable car that can adapt to different conditions. Therefore, one of the future focuses will be optimizing the hybrid system, especially energy recovery during braking. Currently, that system isn't effectively compensating for losses on the straights, leaving Red Bull at a disadvantage in certain sections of the track. If they manage to fine-tune this part of the powertrain, they could regain top speed without compromising cornering grip, thus balancing the RB21 in all types of scenarios. Helmut Marko summed it up clearly. We've gained downforce, but we've paid the price in efficiency. Now the challenge is to achieve both at the same time. And he's not wrong. Red Bull has taken a step forward, but if it wants to regain a commanding lead, it must find the perfect balance between speed, consistency, and reliability. Because while they improve, McLaren doesn't slow down. And the battle for the championship is more open than ever.